This conversation explores reported experiences and long-term research. What you'll hear reflects witness testimony and investigative interpretation, not official scientific or government conclusions.
I have interviewed people who have ended up in mental hospitals after coming forward. And they had witnesses to support their story, physical evidence. It's crazy.
Hello, amazing people, and welcome back to The Ryan Files. For decades, the UFO subject was dismissed, ridiculed, and quietly pushed aside. But while the public laughed, the witnesses never stopped coming forward, and a small number of investigators kept listening. My guest today is one of them. Preston Dennett has spent nearly 40 years interviewing witnesses, documenting encounters, and tracking patterns most people never look long enough to see. Tonight's conversation isn't about belief. It's about what happens when testimony, data, and experience keep repeating the same details decade after decade. This is The Ryan Files. Let's dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this week on The Ryan Files. I'm very excited. My guest today is Preston Dennett, one of the most prolific UFO researchers in the world. He started investigating UFOs back in the 1980s after discovering that people close to him were having dramatic encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses, written more than 30 books, done hundreds of field investigations for MUFON, and dug into everything from abductions and missing time to UFO healings, USOs, and the paranormal. Preston, thank you so much for joining me this week on The Ryan Files.
It's a pleasure and an honor. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. You started doing this in the 80s. Man, that's quite some time, and obviously a lot of data between now and then has been accumulated. But tell us a little about you and what happened back in 1986 when this all started for you.
Yeah, it's almost 40 years now, most of my life. Thankfully, I was pretty young. In 1986, I was 21 years old. Devout skeptic. I absolutely did not believe in UFOs. I was very scientifically minded. I know how far away the stars are. It seemed to me absolutely impossible for ET to get here. Of course, that's just basing stuff on our own technology. So that all changed. I can pinpoint the exact date, actually, November 17, 1986. Probably heard of the Captain Kenju Torochi case in Alaska. Japanese commercial airliner saw two UFOs larger than their jet, tracked it for an hour, was on radar. A great case. This came on the news, and it was very tongue-in-cheek. Very brief. They just kind of joked about this pilot and moved on. But it intrigued me because I thought, this is a pilot. He's probably going to lose his job over this, which I was right. He did, or at least temporarily. But it sparked a memory in me from when I was about 13 years old. And my older brother, Mark, I have three older brothers, an older sister and a younger sister. Big family. And he came running into the house. This is probably 1978, thereabout. Very excited. He said he'd seen a UFO. All I really remember him saying was it was at treetop level, very low. And I just kind of looked at him and shook my head and said, "No, you didn't see a UFO. They're not real. I don't want to hear it." But now hearing this news report, I went back to him and I asked him about it and really got knocked over because he described a very close-up sighting, maybe 100 feet away. Right again at treetop level, this classic flying saucer, colored lights on it, a dome, perfectly quiet, and chased it in his car down Reseda Boulevard. This is in the LA area, Southern California. And he's telling me this. I'm like, "Mark, what are you telling me? I can't even believe my ears." He's like, "Listen, if you don't believe me, my two friends were there, Phil and Greg. I knew them." He's like, "Call them. They'll verify my story," which of course I did. And they verified it, and that's what really started the ball rolling. And I have to tell you, Ryan, I got a huge shock when I found out I knew quite a few people who've had encounters, major encounters.
Wow.
It's not good news. I was pretty upset about it.
Wow. And, this is back during a time, Preston, back then, you didn't just talk about this stuff without people saying, "Man, that dude's crazy," So there's a definite stigma back then that was connected to this, right?
Oh, yeah. I got a lot of eye rolls and side eye and snickering kind of behind my back. I checked out books immediately, trying to disprove this. It's swamp gas, right? No, I found out that there's a UFO cover up. It's taken seriously for decades by very intelligent people. And I started asking everyone I knew. I was so mad to find out, future sister-in-laws had encounters. People I'd known for years,
Wow.
loved and trusted, were keeping secrets from me. I was scandalized. I'm so glad I found out about MUFON very early on, because that would be the next year or so. I joined them, became a field investigator, and that changed everything. That's when I really started digging deep into the subject.
Yeah, for sure. So you joined MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. And that's pretty much worldwide, that organization, correct?
Oh, yeah. Chapters in every state, all over the world. It's the world's largest civilian research organization and has been for years.
Which is exciting because, and we'll get into this later on, but there's a lot of people who say, "Hey, listen, you're never going to find out the truth from government or official, sources." And so this group gets together, it's, civilians, and they're like, "Hey, we're seeing stuff. We're going to start documenting this because the data, it's all in the data." And I think what MUFON does is just absolutely phenomenal. So when you get with MUFON, what's like obviously there's a process that you got to go through. You got to be qualified to do this. It's not like just, Tom, Dick, or Harry saying, "Hey man, I'm going to join MUFON." There's a little bit more to it than that. Explain that process a little bit. And then what's the first case that you investigated?
Yeah, back when I joined MUFON, it was a much smaller organization. I mean, there was the LA chapter, which now, had 100 of people in it, easy, each month they meet. Had 8 people, 9, meeting in the back room of a bank. So it was a pretty shoestring organization at that point. And now you have to go through classes to become a field investigator, and it's a fairly lengthy process. Back then, not so much. They kind of just threw you right into the deep end. They did require you take a test. It's a take-home test. I thought, well, take-home test, this is going to be easy. I love tests. This was before the internet, though. And there was about 200 questions on it, give or take, as I recall. And there was a section on the UFO history, which easy. Betty and Barney Hill, Travis Walton, Calvin Parker. I knew that easily. But there was a section on photography, which, thankfully my sister was into that, so she helped me out. But on meteorology, astronomy, of course, which I'm pretty strong on because I was going through college at that time and really digging deep in science. I loved science. So I did really well on the test, and that was really the only qualification. Of course, people call MUFON. Back then it was based in Texas, and they would farm out cases to the section director, state section director, who would pass it out to the various field investigators. And there was maybe 3 of us at that time, so I got a few cases. The first one, I remember, if I remember correctly, was a gentleman by the name of Brian Forrest, who was working at LAX airport. That really rang a bell for me because I knew LAX had a lot of activity. I ended up writing about it. They've got a history of encounters going way back. A lot of airports do for whatever reason. But he worked there as a groundskeeper. So he's outside all the time and described seeing this very interesting kind of cylindrical object, which was stuck still in the sky. A lot of people should be seeing this, but apparently no one else called, no one else reported it. That's typical. I'd be very generous to say that 1 in 10 people report their sightings. It's probably closer to 1 in 100.
Wow.
But I had him fill out the whole 10, 20-page form. What angle in the sky? What length do you think it was? How close? He drew it for me. And that was the first one. I interviewed a lot of people who saw lights in the sky and things like this. But finding cases where people had humanoids or something, very few.
Right.
And occasionally I'd call them up, and they clam up pretty quick. They didn't want to talk about it, and they drop out.
Wow.
Because, like you said, back then, the stigma was much worse than it is today.
Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of a shame. But we are at a point now where I think people are starting to feel more comfortable coming forward. I think you're seeing it on multiple levels. It's going to ultimately, I think, end up being about whistleblower protection, but that's another subject that we'll get to. So over the years, Preston, you have literally investigated, documented, researched, and put it all on the spreadsheet, so to speak, hundreds of cases. That really has to lend itself to some interesting data that you can start extrapolating from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I started out investigating the cases from my family, which I'm really glad I did, because, the media wasn't really portraying this subject really at all. And when they did, it was very fear-based and honestly somewhat inaccurate. So I was interviewing people I knew weren't lying to me, people I loved and trusted and had amazing stories. And that was a really good place for me to get my feet wet, so to speak, and started really focusing mostly on cases of people who had direct contact, not just a sighting, say, but, saw a humanoid of some kind and or were taken on board or had missing time. I think my first real giant case that just kind of knocked me over was a wave of sightings over what turned out to be my hometown, Topanga Canyon, of all places, because I grew up there, never saw anything. Of course, not when I started digging into the subject, I found a lot of people in the area who were seeing stuff, started scouring the literature. I'm like, wow, people here have been seeing UFOs for years. But on June 14, 1992, there was a giant wave of sightings on that night. And to date, I've probably interviewed about, over 100 people for just this incident.
Wow.
Closer to 150, really, but some of them are just not that great or worthy of, an in-depth investigation.
Right.
Cases really of all kinds. Cars being chased on the road, landings, people seeing humanoids, onboard encounters. Of course, a lot of sightings. The police received a series of calls. I contacted them, gave them my number, so I started getting referrals from the police station. The newspaper, the local newspaper, The Messenger, contacted me, actually, because I had printed an article for them earlier. So that investigation was amazing. I ended up writing a whole book about that wave of sightings. So that's when I really started digging in. I think the first really interesting pattern that I noticed was interviewing this lady who had been healed during her encounter. She was a full-on contactee, taken on board, seen hybrid babies, the whole deal. And she was legit. I mean, she ended up actually showing me UFOs. I had one of my best sightings ever, which is another story. But at any rate, she was suffering from a cyst in her fallopian tubes and was scheduled to have surgery. It was causing her all kinds of problems. It was fully imaged. And the day before surgery, she had what we call a bedroom visitation. She knew that she didn't remember much, but she knew that they had come. And she thought it's very odd that this would happen the day before surgery. And of course, goes to surgery, and the doctors are absolutely baffled. They do the pre-imaging and can't find her cyst. And they accused her of having surgery, which she denied. And they're like, no, you can't deny it. There's a laser scar here, or what looks like one. There's fluid in your fallopian tube. We know you've had surgery. What's going on? She just played dumb. I asked her, why didn't you just tell them the truth? She said, are you kidding? I could have ended up in a mental hospital, which is true. I have interviewed people who have ended up in mental hospitals after coming forward. And they had witnesses to support the story, physical evidence. It's crazy. But long story short, I'm like, this would be a good article. Because at this point, I'm writing a lot of articles for various magazines and newspapers. And I knew that there were some really well-documented healing cases in the literature. Jacques Vallée had a case of a doctor in France who was healed of an axe wound on his foot and partial paralysis. There was a case in Damon, Texas, involving 2 police officers. Beam of light shone down from a UFO and healed one of them of a flesh wound on his finger. And other cases like this, a lady, or rather a gentleman, cured of myopia, nearsightedness, and rheumatism in Peru, a customs official. So I thought, I want to write an article about this. Started surveying the literature and found in literally like 2 or 3 days, over 30 cases.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, this is not being publicized at all. These cases are not being talked about. What's going on?
Yeah.
Found about 100 cases ultimately, and that became my first book, UFO Healings, and really changed the way I thought about what's going on here. Because I, up to that point, was thinking people are being taken on board against their will. This is not good news for humanity. It seems very scary to me. We don't know why people are being taken on board. And I can tell you unequivocally, basically prove it, that healing is definitely a big part of it. And the reason I say that is because Bud Hopkins has cases. I cornered him. He never wrote about it, but he's like, oh yeah, I have cases. But David Jacobs does, John Mack, they all do, all the major researchers. Edith Fiore, Barbara Lamb, Ray Hernandez, Timothy Good, RD6 Killer Clark, Jacques Vallée, of course. I could go on, but Brad Steiger. So that was a really interesting pattern that kind of made me look at UFOs more as almost floating hospitals in a weird way.
Yeah, that's that's fascinating. You said earlier, like you're estimating one maybe in 100 people will come out and talk about it. And we do know that there's this kind of division almost between a contactee and an abductee. There are people who, relish this almost, the people getting healed. And then there's another side of it with more like the abductees that, man, they hate it. They don't want to be abducted. And they have horrifying stories. It's kind of there's a dichotomy there that doesn't really make sense, at least, on the surface. So are we talking potentially, I guess maybe I'll throw it to you. Like, what do you think causes that dichotomy? What do you think causes the difference? Is it different, potential races of aliens that are doing this? Some are more benevolent than others, or what's your thoughts on that? Because there are definitely people who, are abducted again and again and again and don't want to be abducted, but they are being abducted. So, yeah. And then on the, conversely, there's people who are getting healed and look at it as like, hey, this is great, and they're getting downloads and all kinds of stuff. So there's a definite difference there. So kind of explain your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I think the type of ET definitely plays a factor, because when they're short little grays, they're not very emotional or communicative, as opposed to, human looking ETs, which are often described as beautiful or handsome and maybe less tight-lipped, perhaps. I think that plays a role. Fear plays a major role. I've talked to people who've had essentially the same experience in its details. And one will say, oh, this was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I hate it. I wish it would go away. And the other's like, well, I was fine with it. Yeah. And it was really just their own fear. Our beliefs play a real powerful role in how we interpret an experience. So someone who's perhaps really religious might automatically jump to, oh, this is demonic, which I don't think it is. Honestly, because I researched that topic. I branched out into the paranormal pretty quickly because there is bleed-throughs and relationships there. But I can't, Thomas Bullard outlined the basic events that happen when someone's taken on board. And it's being physically examined. They'll give you a tour of the craft. They'll give you messages, these kinds of things. That's it in a nutshell. And that's exactly what I found. So what I found is that someone who has a lot of fear often will have missing time, will interpret it as negative, even though really they weren't necessarily hurt. Being physically examined by grays has got to be terrifying, obviously. And it's a rare person that I've interviewed who hasn't experienced really intense fear, especially in the beginning. I stopped using the word abductee because people were telling me, this is offensive. I like my experiences. And others absolutely look at themselves that way. So what we're seeing is kind of a bell curve. And I'm not going to put, 50% this is bad and 50% this is good in my own files. And there's, some 300 cases. It's definitely shifting towards the more benevolent side with a mixed bag. I would say about 80% of people, because I always ask them, were they evil? How do you feel about them? Very few will go as far as to say they're completely evil. I don't like them. I wish this never happened to me. Most will say, yeah, it was very tough in the beginning. Didn't know what was going on. But after a number of encounters, they start to shift towards like, wow, I really grew from this. They healed me. I've learned a lot. And just by looking objectively, not through the lens of fear, at what happens when a person is taken on board, I don't think we have to be too worried about this.
Interesting.
The most common thing people do describe is being physically examined. And that's very difficult for people, absolutely understandably. And what we're seeing is these short little grays pulling people on board. Mostly grays, by the way. I would say 50, 60%, up to 70 even, involve grays. Then you have human-looking, tall whites, little blue beings, strange humanoids of all kinds. But yeah, they're physically examined. This can sometimes be painful. Very rarely, but it does turn up. Almost always if someone's, saying, it hurts, the ETs will in some way alleviate their pain. Now, this is where a lot of people, their encounters, that's it. That's all they remember. That's all they want to know. It's negative. They don't want to know anymore. But other people who don't have a fear reaction will get the tour of the craft. And I can tell you that a lot of the people that I've interviewed, I would say it's, about half, will be taken down to what we would call the engine room. And the ETs will describe how it works. Basically, it's along the lines of harnessing our magnetic, gravitational field lines, or anti-gravity, free energy, this sort of thing, depending on a person's level of understanding. But then they'll take you up to, this is so interesting to me, what we would call the control room, the helm, and say, this is how we fly the craft. And almost without exception, it's psychically. And I've come to realize that these craft themselves are essentially living beings, embodied, organic to some extent. This took me a long time to unpack, but they will actually sit people down in what we would call the pilot seat and allow them to fly the craft. And it's not at all uncommon for people to say, be taken to the moon or Saturn, or most common out in space, and they look and see the Earth down below, or just a star field, which is, is not bad. Another thing is when people do get a message from ETs beyond, don't be afraid, we're not here to hurt you, you're fine, calm down, no harm will come to you. They always say that, almost without exception, every single time. That's the first thing they will tell you. But beyond that, and this is true for grays or human-looking or praying mantis, always is the same message. And it is warnings against the dangers of nuclear proliferation or the use of nuclear material in any capacity, but also war and aggression, greed and corruption, pollution, the destruction of the environment, upcoming earth changes, something along those lines. And just to kind of cap it off, there's a spiritual component to a lot of these encounters that people describe, because afterwards they'll have an explosion of psychic ability, which is more the rule than the exception. So we see contactees reporting astral projection experiences, developing mediumship, hands-on healing, precognition, these kinds of things. It's really very common. So all in all, I'm like, yeah, this can be very difficult for people. Almost always is. But I am not convinced they're here to hurt, harm, or cause fear or take over or anything like that. There are some really negative experiences, which some are attributable to what we would call MyLabs as well. Military abductions, not really ETs at all, which I think does happen. And that muddies the waters quite a bit. I've interviewed some of these folks who are genuine contactees and then have this going on. So there's a lot going on. And, we know there's disinformation artists in this field. This has been shown again and again. Some have come forward and said, oh, yeah, I did disinformation. So I was so naive getting involved in this field. I had no idea it was so cloak and dagger.
Yeah. The waters get real muddy real quick, too. I mean, and that's part of the, if you're on the other side, it's part of the beauty of it, I guess, because it's easy to, discount, obfuscate, throw disinformation at something, and then, you know, one thing leads to everything being wrong. And it's really a fascinating study, man, human psychology that goes into all that. We'll talk about that. I was interested in what you said about, you know, how some are good, some are bad. And maybe the more religious person or whatnot will view it from a certain paradigm. And, you know, rightfully so. That's everybody views life through their own paradigm. The lens through which you see life, the glasses through which you see life, that's your paradigm. And so that tends to make sense for me. You talked about missing time oftentimes being the thing that happens with negative experiences. And it seems like you hear about them uploading screen memories maybe, or something like that, just to kind of take care of the negative part of it. You know what I mean? Is that something that you think happens? These screen memories, loss of time. Well, you're just not remembering maybe what happened because your experience in your mind is a negative one.
Yeah, screen memories are not fully understood, and I don't claim to fully understand them either. They do turn up, and I've heard every single one you can imagine, from, you know, teddy bears coming into a child's room, you know, transform into grays, superheroes, clowns, cowboys. I mean, you name it. Animals, of course, are very common, owls and deer and things like this. And I think part of the reason is when someone is confronted with a basically non-human creature, their brain tries real hard to interpret this as something that's in their worldview. And, you know, J. Allen Hynek talks about this. He called it theory escalation. People are just kicking off these things like, what could this be? And when it's not that, they move to the next and the next. And I think it's very difficult sometimes for people to process it. And I think there's some evidence that it's not just the ETs causing missing time, it's us. I think it's a two-way street, honestly. We know that people who go through trauma often will have amnesia problems, whether it's, you know, horrific child abuse or, you know, war trauma victims, or, you know, car accidents. People don't even remember what happened. So that obviously plays a role there as well. I still don't fully understand why some people remember and others don't. Because ETs will tell people, like, you'll not remember this until, you know, you're ready, or you'll think of this as a dream. And I think they're kind of facilitating a person's desire to, like, pick this slowly.
Process it. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not at all unusual where someone will go and have a missing time encounter and later go to the bookstore and pick up Whitley Strieber's book. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. Wow. See the picture on communion, and it all comes rushing back. One guy I interviewed from Washington, he had dental surgery, and that's what caused him to remember being taken on board as a child. He had this major 6 hours of missing time. Wow. And that's what it took for him to remember. And he did. Of course, some people do use hypnosis, which, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
It's got some problems with it. I think done accurately or done correctly is absolutely an accurate tool. But yeah, the missing time aspect is a huge problem, particularly with onboard encounters, but turns up with simple sightings as well. Some people will not even remember. There's groups of people, I see this all the time, and 4 will remember it, 2 have no memory of it whatsoever.
Wow.
Just gone. It's a simple sighting.
Yeah. That's interesting, man. You are talking, and I think a lot of people don't realize this. We are actually talking, and maybe it's not the majority, and maybe you can expand on it, but we are actually talking about physically being taken aboard a craft, as opposed to just like for lack of a better word, out of body experience or whatnot. You're actually talking about physically. And I mean, people talk about physically, you know, moving through a wall or a ceiling or whatnot, and being taken onto this craft. A lot of people talk about vibration as they're going through whatever substrate it is. And we all know vibration is, I mean, gosh, Tesla talked all about it. It's kind of the answer to everything. And if you vibrate matter at a certain frequency, they could walk through a wall or whatever. So, I mean, there's a reality, scientific reality to how this could happen, but we are actually talking about physically going onto these craft, correct?
Oh, yeah. There's been attempts to explain this away as sleep paralysis, which really doesn't even come close. Or say it's, some psychological fantasy. There was a whole attempt to call these people fantasy-prone personalities. No, if you unpack this, I have interviewed, for example, there's a gentleman, Tim, from New Iberia, Louisiana, went outside with his brother at 7 a.m., as they did every morning, to bale hay and do farm chores. Well, he turns to his brother and said, "You forgot your gloves. Go back inside and get your gloves." And finally, he's out there alone. And the next thing he knows, his brother and his dad are there and they're furious with him. "Where have you been? We've been looking for you for an hour." He's like, "I've been sitting here on the hay baler. What are you talking about?" And that's when he noticed this kind of cut in his leg and it was bleeding. They thought maybe it was snake bit. He was missing an hour of time. He was not where he was supposed to be. So where are these people? Because I've got case after case of this where people go into, like another gentleman I interviewed from Europe. His mom came into his room, said, "You weren't in your room last night. Where were you?" He had a fully conscious onboard encounter. People are coming away from these encounters with implants, foreign bodies that are diagnosed as foreign bodies. Dr. Roger Lear, of course, did a whole series of removing these objects and studying them. There are multiple witness cases. While it does often happen when someone's in their bedroom, there's a whole category of cases, people driving along, and they're taken while driving. There's no way this is psychological. It is not coming even close to explaining the totality of the evidence. So it's absolutely 100% a physical experience.
Yeah. That's and that whenever you wrap your head around that it is a physical experience, that kind of changes the math too on how you digest some of the data. So that's interesting. You did talk about earlier about UFO healings, but we also have reports, and maybe you can expand on this, reports of implants that have caused some negative impacts on a person. Can you kind of drill down on that a little bit?
Sure. I've interviewed quite a few contactees who at some point will go to the hospital or the doctor or the dentist, and lo and behold, there's an implant. I've come to realize probably the vast majority of contactees probably have these kinds of things. I'm not sure they're always detected. And there's a lot of speculation about what they're for. Everything from mind control to tracking, like we track animals. But I will tell you, one of the early cases I got, the woman was being implanted. They told her, "We're implanting you." And she asked them, "What is it for?" And they said, "This is to measure the levels of pollution in your body," which I thought was kind of interesting because I started, asking more about this. And occasionally EPs would tell people. And another was, it's to monitor your vital signs. Another was basically, it's to boost your immune system. It often seemed to be health related. I talked to one of Roger Lear's clients. I interviewed her about her experiences. She had her implant removed by him. Turned out to be very unusual, of course. It was a week later. They came back and reimplanted her. One lady, she sneezed out her implant.
Wow.
And, tried to recover it on the carpet, couldn't find it, but it was a little cylinder thing. And she ended up tossing it. People do this craziest things. I hear these kind of stories and they're like, "Why did I do that?" And they can't find it. At any rate, she became very sick following this with some hypoglycemia type illness, some blood sugar problem, which the doctors were unable to diagnose. And it got to the point where she lost a lot of weight and was passing out 3 to 5 times a day, had to carry food around with her. They could not figure out what was going on with her. And she had this encounter with this essentially 9-foot tall humanoid being who placed these bell-like silver instruments on her, which pulsed energy into her body. She said it was terrifying. Did not explain anything that was going on. So it was very difficult for her. She has a history of encounters going way back to childhood. But at any rate, she was put back in her living room, could not wake up her family for 20 minutes, just shaking them, could not wake them up. We finally woke up kind of in a daze. But after that, she was very sore and she stopped fainting, every day. Her weight stabilized. She realized, oh my gosh, I think they healed me. I'm leaning towards these implants being health related. And the more research I do on it, that is what I'm seeing. I think there's some evidence that they facilitate communication as well. People will feel it buzzing or hear beeping tones, and that's when the UFOs perhaps show up, or they'll get what we call a download. There's a few cases where people were told that basically it's to help them communicate with the ETs. Or monitor them in some way. One lady, she says her implant would always go off whenever she was intimate with her husband in any way. When she hugged him, when she kissed him, when they were seriously intimate, she would have these really annoying beeping tones. She went to the doctor. She thought she had tinnitus, a bug in her ear. Never could figure it out until she was taken on board and had a long conversation with a gray who explained exactly that they were studying her emotions.
Wow.
So I think there's a lot of reasons for these implants.
Yeah, that's crazy. And, you kind of made a salient point there where it gets removed and then all of a sudden you get sick. Well, there's one mind that would say, dealing with these and messing around with them will make you sick. But there's also, maybe it was keeping you well. Very interesting, man.
Yeah, we need more research on this. It's so important people remain objective because there's a lot of shoe fitting and cherry picking in this field.
Oh, yeah.
I'm accused of being like an apologist or Pollyanna or sanguine. I'm like, no, listen, I'm presenting cases factually. It's not my job to say or gaslight a witness and say, this was good for you. No. I don't do that. I am, in my books, you'll see this.
Yeah.
I absolutely report a person's case as factually as I possibly can, vetting it, doing all the fact checking I can possibly do. So ultimately, I do fall on the more benevolent side as opposed to like David Jacobs, who's convinced they're going to come and take over at some point.
Well, and that's kind of the question, right, Preston? Because we have, and I think this is probably a subjective answer as well. A lot of this is just because we don't know. But what is the objective? I mean, if you're taking people, doing medical exams, potentially placing implants to monitor pollution in your body or your emotions or whatever it is, there's got to be some objective. And there's some people that believe it's a breeding program. There's some people that believe it's just understanding the race better. Research, like, hey, we're just gray alien geeks. We just, want to study humanity. There's all kinds of takes on this, but there has to be some objective behind it. Have you heard of anyone, saying, hey, they told me this was the objective or anything like that in your research?
Oh yeah. I think we really love to pigeonhole things and say, well, this is why. Yeah. And I'm not so sure we can just point to one reason that this is happening, because there's a number of cases which honestly sound like they're tourists just coming down for a look-see. A number of cases, they're coming down over mines. I did a whole study of that. Gold mines, silver mines, you name it. Uranium mines, and actually landing and interacting. Graveyards, weird as that sounds, there's dozens of cases from a lot of major researchers where they're landing in graveyards and doing something there. Possibly retrieving implants. That's kind of my latest theory. But I think we've got a pretty good handle on what we would call the ET agenda. And absolutely one is hybridizing. This has profound implications because we see this mostly with grays, but certainly all different types of humanoids. One of my first cases involved this. The daughter was taken on board. Genetic material was taken. She was shown babies. We call it a baby presentation. They're like, hold the babies, give them love, this sort of thing. And they were half gray, half human. That is absolutely going on. And I've got many cases of that over the years. It's not always there, not every case of where a woman is taken on board, but men too. They'll be shown children like, this is half yours. One gentleman from upstate New York was shown his child and said, isn't this wonderful? This is your child. He's like, no, this is not wonderful. How dare you do this to me? He felt nurturing towards this child, but at the same time, he was also disgusted, repulsed. All of these emotions were going through him. That's one major agenda, for sure. Another is, I think, collecting genetic material of all kinds, from plants and animals, even soil samples. We've got so many cases of this, where all different life forms are being essentially collected. And I think perhaps they're very much interested in preserving genetics, or certainly studying it. There's a very strong interest in genetics. Healing, as I mentioned, is absolutely and undeniably a part of this. Why are they healing? Some people feel like, well, it's because I'm part of their program. Not everyone who's healed is like head over heels, like, I love this. They feel a little bit used. I would say most are really grateful, but not everybody. Absolutely. One of their agendas is to warn us that we're on the wrong pathway, the pathway towards self-destruction. And this is so easily demonstrably true, because we never had the huge numbers of onboard encounters until 1947, thereabouts, the atomic age, when we finally were polluting every river, lake on this planet, the air, the water. That's when they started coming down in large numbers and taking people on board. And it's far, far more common than people realize. J. Allen Hynek said 1 in 40. And I heard that quote, like, you got to know. I would know somebody. That's what got me to ask everybody. And of course, the Roper organization, a polling organization in 1991, did a survey and found 1 in 50. So it is pretty common. And I think, they're warning people. Another is simply to announce their presence. We see this in huge waves of sightings over city centers or small towns. I did a whole book on schoolyard encounters, like Rua, Zimbabwe, that case you've probably heard of.
Yep.
One of hundreds. The Westall High School in Australia, Crestview Elementary in Florida, Broadhaven in Wales, Hillsdale College in Michigan. They are essentially doing what Frank Salisbury was the first to term it, displays. He wrote the Utah UFO display. They are showing themselves on purpose, intentionally. I think it's a vigorous publicity campaign, essentially to announce their presence. I did a whole book on drive-in theater encounters, which is so bizarre, but absolutely, I found 100 cases. So that's one of their agendas. I think another is to wake people up to their own psychic abilities, because it's a rare contactee that doesn't happen to. They're absolutely tracking certain family lines, because we know this is generational. So that, in a nutshell, I think is some of the main reasons. But I'm guessing there's quite a few we have still to discover.
Yeah. The hybridization program is fascinating, and probably one of the reasons why you see this happening with the same person again and again and again. Maybe there's a compatibility thing going on there. And also in family lines. You said they're very interested in genetics, which obviously would mean, the family lines, families, and not just, generationally as well. You see a pattern of that happening. You've got the right sauce, so to speak. Seems to be an indication that there are certain people that are more compatible than others, and those are the ones that are being abducted, right?
Yeah, people try to pin it down to Rh negative bloodlines. And no, I've talked to people with all kinds of different blood types. I have to tell you, I've talked to people of every different ancestry as well. Asian, Black, Latino, Caucasian, Pacific Islander, you name it. My own files are evenly divided between men and women, by the way, 50-50.
Wow.
I've talked to people who are very young when they've had encounters. That's actually more the rule than the exception. It starts around age, probably much younger than we remember, but at least 4 or 5. Late would be this age 7 or 8, and continues throughout a person's life. Sometimes very sporadic, sometimes quite often. One, like I mentioned, yeah, a lot of them are psychic. Here's an interesting pattern which really floored me, which kind of slipped under my radar for the longest time. I'd interviewed this lady from Norway who contacted me because of my research into healing cases. She's like, that happened to me. I had Greys come into my house and they were not at all communicative. They came into her bedroom, flipped her around like a rag doll, put this device on her back, a cylinder type device with a handle. I've heard it described from others, and pressed it against her back and healed her of chronic back problems. She had a bad injury, which basically messed up her back. And so I'm going through the questions I have, which was, have you had other encounters? No. Any childhood encounters? No. Anyone in your family? No. She was not fitting the profile, and it was very puzzling to me. And so I'm just going down the list. Finally, I asked her, because you have to ask difficult questions. Do you do drugs? And your history of mental illness. It's awkward and uncomfortable, but if you're going to be an investigator, you've got to go there. And she was fine. I'm like, okay, I think she's a legit contactee because she's describing things I'd heard before that a lot of people don't know. Mm-hmm. Finally, I asked her what she does for a living. And she says, well, I used to be a graphic artist. I'm like, okay. She says, but now I'm retired. Actually, I'm very, very active in human and animal rights in my country. I'm well known. Please don't use my name. I'm like, okay, I would never. But it rang a bell for me because I had just interviewed Reverend Michael Carter, who's pretty prominent in this field. He's written a number of books. He was healed of a blood clot by what we call human-looking ETs. I don't like the term Nordic because it's not accurate. I call him human-looking.
Okay.
And he fights against racism. He's a black man, and he's worked very hard to fight against racism. Got awarded by the president. And I'm like, gosh, there's John Hunter Gray. He was a social worker for Native American rights. He was healed. I started looking at my files. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of doctors who are having encounters, nurses, teachers, writers, inventors, police officers, musicians, people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. Mm. And it was it really kind of changed my mind about like who's being contacted. One gentleman I interviewed, devout Mormon from Utah, basically left organized religion after his encounters, as many people I've talked to have, that kind of moved towards more spirituality-based faith. Mm-hmm. But he was healed. He's had all these major encounters, a full-on contactee. And I asked him what he does for a living, because he was healed. He's like, well, I'm a bus driver. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess the pattern isn't always there. But he says, my real passion is I run this website, Shabala, where I give psychic readings for people and I'm helping them spiritually evolve. I'm like, oh, well, here we go. This is the pattern I keep seeing.
Wow.
It's not a hard, fast rule, but it's there.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. Yeah, that's very interesting. What about, you mentioned earlier, military abductions, allegedly. And so let's set the groundwork for this. There's a, it's well known in the community about the Greada Treaty between Eisenhower and the Greys and whatnot. Do you believe, number one, that there are treaties between governments of the world and some of these creatures that are allowing abductions for, let's just say, technology? Is there a real crash retrieval program and reverse engineering? And does the governments of the world, our government in particular, do they have our version of the UFOs that and go around and kind of mimic what's going on with actual UFOs? Is any of that? What's your thoughts on it?
All right, that's like 4 or 5 questions. I'm gonna forget one of those. I'll do my best.
Dive in.
As far as the Greada Treaty, I've heard of it. I tried to track it down to its source. I think I found it, John Lear. I honestly don't buy it. I don't find the reporting on that very credible. Okay. I think the Edwards Air Force meeting of 1954 did take place, because the reporting on that is amazing. And the more researchers look into it, something did take place there. I'm not so sure ETs would, hand over technology to a corrupt, warlike species. And from a contactee angle, I interviewed one lady who's probably my favorite contactee, Department of Defense employee and a nurse, Dolly Saffron. I wrote a whole book about her because she has fully conscious contact. Her whole life, doesn't need hypnosis, has no fear of this, and works very closely with them, and proved it to me. She has photographic evidence, implant evidence, proof of healings, other medical evidence, corroborating witnesses, and actually, I had my own onboard experience with her UFO. I mean, so to me, I've moved beyond belief. I had my own experience. I know she's for real. And I say that because her story is so extensive, and she was told flat out, no, ETs have never made any treaty. That would never happen. Nor are ETs responsible for cattle mutilations. That's being done by nefarious government agents. And she's got a lot of information. As far as reverse engineering and crash retrievals, oh yeah, I think Roswell is a great case. If you talk to Don Schmidt, he'll lay it out in black and white. There's like 100 books, more on Roswell alone. And of course, we know it's not just Roswell. If you look at the research of Leonard Stringfield and Ryan Wood and others, Raymond Fowler, he had a very good case of Paradise Valley crash in terms of a firsthand eyewitness. We're looking at probably a couple of hundred UFO crash retrievals. There's no doubt in my mind there's a program for this. And in terms of reverse engineering, oh yeah, the number of whistleblowers who talk about this is edging towards 1,000, if not more. And I think most major researchers have interviewed a few folks at least who've reported this. My best one that I had was this gentleman who was literally on his deathbed in a hospital looking for a UFO researcher. And God bless him, he found me and really wanted to do his part for disclosure because he was a civilian subcontractor for the military and worked at Edwards Air Force Base. That my ears pricked up immediately because if you know the history of Edwards, it's insane. And it's absolutely insane in terms of the reverse engineering, the sightings that have gone on there since 1947, and the landing filmed by Gordon Cooper, and on and on. So I'm like, okay, I'm all ears. Verified his employment, by the way. I always do my fact checking when I can. And he said that he was on a job at Edwards Air Force Base, walking along the tarmac with his employer, passing by a warehouse with a large open window, and saw a UFO inside, hovering above the ground, the size of a little sports car. Mirror smooth, chrome-like finish, floating above the ground, making a low buzzing noise. That's what attracted his attention. So he turns to his employer like, what the heck is that? His employer turned bone white and jammed his finger against his lips, wouldn't even talk about it, and got real angry when he kept pressuring him. And finally, when they were, out of view, said, don't ever ask me that. You weren't supposed to see that. Shut up, or we'll kick you out right now. And did the job. And 2 years later or so, a year later, same employer calls him up. It's an emergency. We need you to come back. Well, he's like, I'm not coming back. No way, unless you tell me what we saw. And they had got into a whole, well, he called it, pissing match.
Yeah.
And, got into a heated discussion about this. And finally, he's like, fine, I'll tell you, but you cannot tell anybody. You have to promise me you'll never tell anybody. I could lose my job. You could lose your job. There's repercussions. So he didn't tell anybody until he died about a month later. He said that his employer told him that what they saw was not a UFO. It was a reverse engineered craft taken from ET technology and does have anti-gravity. And the propulsion is, let me see if I can get this right, is based on the idea of counter-rotating magnets that create a magnetic field that propels the craft in the desired direction. That's all I could get out of him. So that was interesting to me because certainly that's the kind of story so many whistleblowers are telling right now.
Yeah.
I think we have reverse engineered these craft. I think that a good portion of what we're seeing is not ET.
Yeah.
If you haven't talked to Michael Schrad, you've got to. He's amazing. He's really the go-to guy with this. Absolutely, we've got the stuff. I don't think we reverse engineered to the point where we can do the things they can do, but it would be very convincing to someone that this was a genuine UFO. When I'm not so sure it is.
Wow. And do you believe that that we have these craft and we might be on the military side doing our own abductions for whatever reason?
I was so skeptical of this initially. I know Stephen Greer put forth this pretty vigorously. I had a big argument with him one day because he's trying to say, "Oh, they're all the quote abductions are government." I'm like, no. There's no way. This is far more common. I interviewed this kid who was 7 years old in Texas, a paper boy. He was taken on board. Government's not going to come down and take a 7-year-old kid on his paper route. That doesn't make any sense. And it's in my family, you know. It's far more common than people realize. There would have to be an army of people doing this. But as I continued to interview people, I started running into cases. One gentleman was a Marine, really good witness, and had genuine encounters as a young kid, no doubt in my mind. You know, there were witnesses who saw it as well. His family confirms it. But he ended up joining the Marines at a very young age. He had to sign a waiver. He was like 17. Wow. And went to Camp Pendleton, and he says they basically pulled a whole number on him. They brainwashed him. They drugged him. They did the whole mind control stuff. And he ended up having really negative encounters. And to this day, he thinks they're demonic. Absolutely is convinced that they're evil. But it's messed up. He has been MyLabs, no doubt in my mind. Yeah, I think this does happen. And it's really unfortunate because occasionally I'll interview people who started out and they're okay, but at some point we'll have these horrific negative encounters. And I think our secret governments, for lack of a better word, you know, I don't know that it's, you know, the senators and the presidents and so forth. I think it's the military industrial complex. I think it's the highest level of the military, the intelligence agencies, the cabal, perhaps, is the term people use, that are doing this and are using mind control techniques, psychotronic technology, hypnosis, drugs, and faking these horrific encounters for people in an attempt to sort of steer the narrative and paint ETs as the enemy. Of course, there's a lot of buzz about this, and I don't know, a false flag, a fake ET invasion. So, that's weird.
Can of worms open, worms everywhere.
Yeah,
for sure. You mentioned, and this is a fascinating thing that you mentioned this Marine who believes they're demonic. There are people out there absolutely believe that. There's another side of that story that you've kind of, expounded on as well. But you also have been involved in paranormal research from ghost huntings and all kinds of stuff like that. Is there any connective tissue between the alien phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, and, you know, on the other side of that, maybe ghost hunting and spirits and all this stuff? Is there a connective tissue? Because you talk about, you know, people having all of a sudden more psychic abilities. And then, you know, you got psychics who are, you know, mediums talking to dead people, and then dead people are ghosts. And there seems like there's a connection somehow, some way, shape, or form. Kind of expound on what that is in your opinion.
Yeah, this puzzled me for decades. I'm like, I don't understand this. Because I would get a case where a person had a UFO landing and then Bigfoot shows up, they have a poltergeist outbreak, and all this stuff is going on. There's a connection there, no doubt in my mind. I interviewed people who had a horrific haunting that was clearly demonic, and ended up having this profound UFO sighting afterwards. What is going on here? It's driving me crazy, because I started developing my interview skills pretty early on by leaving my questions open-ended. I'm like, anything unexplained happened to you? And it wouldn't be just UFOs. It would be this whole smorgasbord of stuff. So this was very difficult. And I'm like, okay, are we dealing with ETs even? because this is, what's going on here. Could they be demonic? No. And I'll tell you why I don't think they're demonic is because I have interviewed people who've had demonic hauntings. It follows a very set pattern of manifestation, and it's completely different from the onboard UFO experience. And there's another theory that this is an alien intelligence that's not ET. It's wearing different masks. And it used to masquerade as fairies in ancient days. And everything you see, Bigfoot, ghosts, whatever it is, it's all a mask. It's in consciousness and intelligence that is controlling your belief system. That's the second most popular theory, by the way. And there's very prominent researchers like Jacques Vallée and many others who are subscribers to this. I'm not. Jacques Vallée's reasons, God bless him. He's a huge asset to this field. I've got all his books. I love the guy.
Yeah.
But I don't subscribe to that because it fails to explain reverse engineering technology, the implants. Where are people when they're taken on board? What about people who've had missing pregnancies and then see the child and then see the kid and then see the adult? There's a lot of reasons, what is burning the ground to 1,000 degrees? And what is appearing on radar? How does something metallic appear out of nothing? There's a lot of reasons I don't subscribe to that theory. And as far as fairies, well, I think there probably are little people. And some of those were probably ET. It's much more likely, in my mind, that it was misinterpreted rather than this being something that wears different masks. So I think we're dealing with ETs, but what is going on with these Bigfoot cases?
Yeah.
That one was upsetting because I'm like, this makes no sense. I had to do Bigfoot research. I had to become a darn Bigfoot researcher, which I didn't want to do. I knew that was a can of worms, and it was. It was a huge can of worms. Bigfoot is real. I'll say it. I've interviewed enough people to, come to that conclusion, and the evidence is outstanding. It's very much like UFOs, largely circumstantial. A lot of anecdotal testimony, but footprints and hair samples and voice recordings and, of course, pictures and video. At any rate, that one gentleman I interviewed I mentioned had a UFO land, and then Bigfoot showed up, and then had a poltergeist outbreak.
Yeah.
So here's my current assessment with this, because there's about 100 cases that are well documented where these two phenomenon, for lack of a better word, intersect perfectly.
Right.
People see a Bigfoot going on board a UFO. Not kidding. I kind of threw those cases away for a while, but they're adding up. Or see a UFO right after a UFO lands. This is going to sound crazy. This is my assessment. Bigfoot, I think, is real. I think probably they've got some level of sentience to them. I think I'm going to get flack for this. I know it. I think some Bigfoot are contactees. Plain and simple. All animals, all life forms are being contacted. Why the heck not Bigfoot? Here's another thing that I kind of helped me unpack this. Like, what is the poltergeist activity going on? People have a poltergeist outbreak. And I've heard this over and over again. One lady I interviewed in Mount Rainier, Washington, had a humanoid silver suit, little jumpsuit, come into her room. She woke up, had missing time. There was a light, buzzing noises. She thought everyone in the building has got to be seeing this. Of course, nobody did. Woke up on top of her covers. Some really good, quote, circumstantial evidence, right? It was anecdotal. At any rate, she was feeling very fluish, goes to work that morning. She had to work as in an office, and is starting up her computer and blows it out. She's like, okay. Calls the IT guy, like, fix my computer. Goes to the copier, blows that out, and turns to the IT guy, like, after you're done there, copier. Goes to the fax machine. Back in those days, we had fax machines. She put that one offline as well. So there was something about her bioelectric field that was triggering electronics. And we can see this with contactees over and over again, blowing out light bulbs, making TVs fuzz up, radios, you name it. The gentleman I mentioned, the Marine, he worked in a car factory, an auto factory, welding. There was this huge welding machine that was very expensive, and he kept knocking it offline. over and over again. No one else would. Only him. He'd go up there, boom, it malfunctions. They made him go to the doctor and undergo a physical examination. They found an implant in his body after x-raying him. But it's his bioelectric field. I'm telling you, this is what it is. There's something about the contact experience that is making people very sensitive to electronics. Contactees rarely can wear watches successfully. So there's these little details that, we are still trying to fully understand, but I think that's what's going on. I can't prove it, but I think that explains because people will come away from experience. They're seeing shadow people now. What's going on? And, they're having mediumship. They're starting to channel. They can do healing really effectively. And that's kind of a big thing because that turns up a lot. Is hands-on healing after an encounter. So that's what I think is going on. I think that's the connection between paranormal and Bigfoot and this sort of thing.
Very interesting. You mentioned having your own experience, being aboard a craft. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, this was really interesting to me because I loved reading UFO books, right? Because it was so fascinating. And then talking to witnesses, I'm like, wow, this is even better than reading a book because you're talking to the guy.
Yeah.
You're not seeing it, and there's a world of difference between talking to someone or reading a book and actually seeing something. I wanted to see a UFO, and I was dead set to see one. That's the only way you're going to know. There's a belief and there's knowledge, and knowledge only comes from personal experience. And that's the kind of researcher I am. I want to experience it. And I ended up having a Bigfoot encounter. I had ghost encounters because I was going to find out if this stuff was real, whatever it took. And there's a really interesting phenomenon called UFO investigator's disease, which I found out about from Ed Conroy, who decided to try to disprove Whitley Strieber. Is he hoaxing or isn't he? He's a mainstream journalist, Ed Conroy, and basically hung out with Whitley Strieber for a year, interviewed everybody, came away 100% convinced, but started having his own encounters. And I started surveying researchers, and this is not uncommon. Barbara Lamb is a good example. I believe Yvonne Smith, if you corner her, will tell you. Brad Steiger, all of them have had some level of contact. Not all of them, but I don't think David Jacobs ever said he did, or John Mack, but at any rate, a lot of them. And very early on, I started seeing unexplained lights. I thought, well, that's because I'm out there looking. I want to see this stuff. Because when I'd interview someone and they saw something, I'm like, I'm coming over. Can I sleep in your backyard? Seriously. And I would. And I would see these unexplained lights. But here's the thing. Finding out that UFOs were real threw me for such a loop that I became, ironically, more skeptical. Because I didn't trust anybody anymore. So I've seen this stuff. I'm like, interesting, but that's not a craft. How do I know? It's unexplained lights. But some were really amazing. But finally, I'm driving home one day, and this was July 1992. I'm in the middle of investigating this Topanga Canyon wave, and I'm driving home from my brother's house, who lives right in the neighboring town, Woodland Hills. And it's midnight. I have to work the next day. It's Sunday. And I'm coming down this tiny little street at 5 miles an hour when I see what I thought is a bird coming down towards my car, and look up at it. And it's midnight. It's not a bird. It's glowing and it's round. I'm thinking, oh my God, it's a firecracker. It's late July. Someone's got a firecracker here. Comes down and stops right in front of my car. So now I'm thinking, well, reflection, even though at this point it's not a reflection. It's an orb. If this was an honest to God orb right in front of my windshield, I stopped the car. It was right in front of my face, scanned my windshield back and forth, stopped again. So this is intelligently controlled. And dips down and goes straight up, missing time. Didn't remember any of it for 3 months or so. Suddenly came back. I would have turned around and told my brother, and I didn't. So that was kind of the first one. That year I ended up having 3 or 4 amazing sightings of unexplained lights and things like this. And it just kind of ramped up from there. Every couple of years, I'd be hanging out with contactees, major ones, and something would happen. And I could go, and it would take me an hour to go through all the stuff. But ultimately, I meet Dolly Saffron, who's this major contactee. And on my birthday in 2022, I'm dreaming in my bedroom. I'm just dreaming. And suddenly I wake up and I'm being pulled through the darn wall. It kind of opens up and I'm hurtling through space. Weird thing is I kind of recognize the feeling of this kind of electric feeling of being pulled on. I knew exactly what was happening because there was almost this like recall going on of prior experiences. Because I had been dreaming, I'd been on board and all this. I didn't talk about this for years because, kind of pollutes you as an investigator. Like, oh, this is happening to me.
Yeah.
But it did. So this is, I'm just telling you what happened. And next thing I know, this is like 30 seconds of hurtling through darkness. I'm lying on a darn table inside a round room surrounded by little guys and this very tall, slender, hybrid-looking woman wearing this snow white jumpsuit with nothing on it. She's looking down at me, kind of tilting her head like, are you okay? I'm like, I'm fine. And I'm trying to get up because I'm looking at the walls. It's funny, you interview so many people and they talk about how the walls are, have no seams and they curve into the floor and the ceiling. And you get a picture in your mind of what that looks like. It was a little different. I'm like, oh, okay. And finally got off the table. We're like, okay, you're fine. And there's this tall gray who turns out is Dolly Saffron's, the contactee I know, her main contact, who she calls Mama. This is a 7-foot tall gray. I rushed up to her and looked at her, and she's the epitome of elegance and grace and beauty and wisdom. I mean, it's the energy coming off of her is amazing. I have no fear of this stuff. When I see a UFO, I'm running towards it. Right. Foolhardy, maybe, but it is what it is. And she tilts her head and looks at me and speaks telepathically and says, so, is this what you thought it would be like? And I said, no, this is much better. This is amazing. And it was a 5-minute long experience. There were some people standing in the center, humans, all lined up. They were out of it, entranced, would not answer my questions. I walked to the other side. There's windows at a 45-degree angle, kind of like, on in a building or a cruise ship or something. You're looking down, and I could see the Earth, and it was round. For all you flat earthers out there, it's absolutely round. It wasn't a globe way the heck out there, but I'm trying to figure out exactly how high by looking at satellite photographs and stuff. I'm guessing about 500 miles, because you could absolutely see the curve of the Earth. And they dropped this darn craft in 1 second down to the surface. And it rocked slightly and they zoomed back up. It was amazing. I saw some grays over in the corner. I'm like, whoa, that did give me a little bit of they look different. And then I walked back to this very tall gray and she gave me this glass tumbler, or what looked like glass, of this greenish liquid and asked me to drink it. I trusted her, I drank it. I sniffed it first. I always sniff whatever I eat or drink. And it had no odor, but did taste a little bit like kiwi or lime, perhaps. And that was essentially, she took it back. I'm like, wait, you said I thought this was mine. She's like, you want another? Go ahead, take another sip. And I did, and that was it. I blacked out and woke up in bed.
Wow.
That's it in a nutshell.
I got you. Well, it's fascinating for you to have gone through that, and also then all these other experiences and be able to. I imagine there has to be a little bit of a. I believe people now a little bit more, having experienced it yourself.
Oh yeah. It's funny because people will state their opinions as fact. And I've been very careful not to do that.
Right.
Because I don't know. I interview these people, and by and large, all they have is their own testimony. They might have a scar. They might have an x-ray of an implant. But very, very rarely do I see any photographs that are like at all impressive. It does turn up.
Yeah.
So but when you have multiple witness cases and you're interviewing the neighbors who are like, oh my gosh, yeah, I did see lights come down. And the witness you interviewed doesn't even know this.
Yeah.
So you start to come to a point like, well, you know this is true.
Right. Yeah. And that's what's fascinating. I believe it's a true phenomenon. Obviously never experienced anything, but it's fascinating it changes your paradigm on, the world we think we live in. It's like we're not in Kansas anymore, and
Sister-in-law, you should have seen her face when, I finally got her to admit she saw grays walking by our home in Van Nuys, right in front of Stagg Street Elementary School.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, what was that like? She's like, I didn't know they were grays. She had never heard of these things. She knew they were not human, but she said it was like being woken up when you're already awake. Your whole belief system collapses.
Yeah.
And I kind of got that feeling when I found out UFOs were real. My whole belief system I had to rebuild from the bottom up.
Yeah.
I try not to have any beliefs. I know this, I don't know this, and that's kind of where I try to leave it, but you can't help but have some beliefs.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
Yeah. A couple more questions for you. That you just mentioned grays. I interviewed a person who talked about being on a ship, not unlike what most people are, and being there, but seeing gray, almost bodysuits of the short, tiny grays. There's a number of people who have seen these things either hanging up or whatnot, where these tiny little grays are actually maybe automatons of some sort, controlled by something else, be it AI, the robotic, whatever, kind of not even living, maybe just little flesh suits, and they're the ones oftentimes who come in, gather you up, and then you go on the ship, and then you see the taller grays. You see the humanoid looking ones, or Nordics, or whatever you want to call it. Have you ever heard any of these things about these bodysuits of the tiny grays?
Oh yeah, all the time. First time I heard about it was with Whitley Strieber. He's like, they were stacked like cordwood.
Yeah. And
I've heard this a few times, and I always kind of was puzzled by it, because these are the grays that are not emotional.
Right.
They won't talk to you very much, other than, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you. They'll move in lockstep. People get the impression that these are not emotional or living beings all the time. And I'm like, gosh, what's going on here? I do think that they are AI, biological androids. I'm going to mention Dolly Saffron again, because I asked her about this. She's like, oh yeah, they store them in a room. They click their arms together. You can turn them off or on. They're not born. They don't die. They're not ensouled, or, they're not living beings as we would think of it at all, but used for basically grunt work or dangerous work. When picking people up, because these little grays are somewhat delicate. There's a whole category of cases where people have lashed out at them and snapped their neck, or, pulled out an arm or something like this, punched him. Travis Walton is a good example. It's like their face went squished right in like marshmallow. So I think we're dealing with little automatons and grays. And this is an important point I'd love to make, because we're seeing, almost without exception, humanoids, which I knew about from the beginning. I'm like, this is too Star Trek. This is too Star Trek. This could not be real. This is crazy. ETs, if they existed, would be more like the Blob, or tentacles is what I'm thinking, from pure, speculation, obviously, because we don't know anything. Until we go to another planet, we don't know what ETs are going to look like.
Right.
We're stuck with these reports of humanoids, almost without exception. Eyes, nose, mouth, heads, 2 arms, legs, and variations of this. Now, if these grays are interbreeding with us, what does that say about who they are and who we are? If there's human-looking ETs out there, what does that say about human evolution, human origins, our relationship to these guys? So coming from an contactee angle and interviewing these contactees, those who move past the fear and get any kind of communication, at some point will be given that message.
Yeah.
We are you. You are us. We are one. We share a common heritage. We share a common ancestry. We are essentially human. We looked like you once. The Greys will say this over and over again. So I think what we're dealing with is not so much different species as we would think of it. Because people say, oh, we're different races on Earth. No, we're not, actually. All of us are human, and we have different ancestries. And look at the variation on Earth alone from 7 foot tall to 4 foot tall or shorter, and every skin color and face shape and eyes, nose, mouth, all of it. And you could stick grays in there and some tall whites and a little blue, and they would fit right in. It would take you, where's Waldo? It would take a little while to pull them out. And this is the message from ET directly. This is not speculation. This is what contactees are being told. We all share the same genetics. The human form is the universal template throughout the universe. And humanity did not evolve on this planet. We at one point lived on Mars. This comes up again and again. Allegedly, and this comes from many sources, the Greys have a planet in the Orion system. That's the only one that I find super credible in terms of, where do these guys come from? Because they're very tight-lipped about that. People ask, where are you from? Oh, it's not important. You wouldn't understand. Someplace you don't know about yet. Or just ignore your question. But yeah, I think our relationship to them, at the very least, is far closer than perhaps we initially thought.
Wow. And that's the other big question I was going to ask. And this has been fascinating, Preston. Thank you so much. We hear stories about the relationship between Homo sapien and some of these creatures. We hear stories about, they're from the future, but we also hear stories about they're from, other planets nearby. We hear they're from other star systems far, far, far away. We hear about the Mars thing. We hear that perhaps they live underground here on planet Earth. Is there any stories or documentation or anything out there that you have ever heard of, witnessed, that say, or, they live under the water or whatever, their origin? Is there any information about that?
A lot out there. And what we have is basically almost everything we know about ETs comes from one source, anything credible, which is the contactees. You can turn to the government for answers, but I don't trust them at all because they've lied from day one and are still lying, covering up. I don't trust them until and unless they're willing to admit to Roswell or the Malmstrom incident or the Gordon Cooper landing at Edwards Air Force Base or any one of a dozen high-profile cases. I don't think we should even listen to them because I think they know, the secret government. No, we aren't fully sure where these guys come from. I've heard reports that the mantids are one of the oldest races. They're very intelligent. But as far as I know, no, we don't really know. I don't think they're us from the future because there are a few people who put forth that, hypothesis. And you can see some of my books. I've got bookcases going around the room there. And I scour the literature and I've, coordinate with various researchers and I'm interviewing people firsthand. I don't find enough cases that speak towards them being from the future.
Yeah.
They can certainly do things with time that we don't understand in terms of pulling people out of what appears to be the third dimensional time stream and into perhaps the fourth dimension. There's the Oz effect. People will be surrounded by traffic and then suddenly traffic is gone. People aren't moving. It's deadly quiet. And they'll have an hour-long experience and they'll return minutes later. They can do things with time. They'll give predictions, sometimes accurate, sometimes not. Or show people the past even, but it's more like a window. I don't think they're going there. So no, I don't think they're time travelers. As near as I can tell, they're biological beings very much like us and have been around for a very long time. Because if you look at the ancient aliens concept,
yeah,
there's previous iterations. Michael Cremo, talk to this guy. No doubt we've had previous advanced civilizations on this planet. He's basically proved it from an archaeological perspective.
Yeah.
But we've got cave paintings, we've got stone carvings, we've got ancient writings from India, Vimanas.
Yeah.
The Romans called them flying shields. We know they've been around since probably before recorded history.
Yeah.
So I think they're people like us, and yeah, probably from other planets.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem too. Academia will never accept any of this stuff. So that becomes a problem too, where there's so much evidence in archaeology and whatnot that leads towards advanced technology for sure, deep in the past and whatnot, and potentially the connection with whatever this phenomenon is. So it's fascinating.
It doesn't fit the current paradigm, gets thrown out.
Exactly.
They won't even look at it.
Yep.
But that's not science. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. That's the problem, right? It's like, oh, let me have all my peers review this. And if you don't agree with the public narrative or the popular narrative, then you won't get funding. So of course you're going to agree with it, and there's countless times where you hear, academics saying, oh, I disagree with this, but I'm going to agree with it because I won't get funding. It's a mess, man. It's a mess. Cause you're right. It ends up then not being actual science. So, in closing, I guess maybe I'll take you down one more little rabbit trail.
All right.
We talk about our government. And I understand exactly where you're coming from with what you're saying. The narrative is always shifting. To what degree I'm encouraged with the UFO UAP hearings in Congress. Yeah. Sometimes there's a little bit of there, but not a lot. And you got a lot of disinformation campaigns going on and whatnot, but at least the ball is rolling versus how for many, many years there's no ball, So, how much does the government know? And in your opinion, are they hiding their ignorance or are they hiding evidence?
Latter. I would say they absolutely know probably far more than most contactees, far more than pretty much all researchers. Because if you follow the money, if you look, this subject has been taken incredibly seriously. And we have studies like Project Blue Book and the Condon Committee and the Robertson Panel, which we now know were disingenuous, not real studies. The best cases didn't even reach Blue Book. They went straight to the Air Technical Intelligence Command. I've got a case of a UFO over a drive-in theater, which the Sheriff Leroy Hatfield sent the report to Edwards Air Force Base. It was marked action in red, and it was sent to the commanding general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is 1952. Sent to the Director of Intelligence at Washington, D.C., and sent to Ent Air Force Base, where we track everything coming in and out. They knew from the beginning that this was real. So all these claims it's hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, and mental illness was a whitewash. They've got the craft, they've got the bodies, they're reverse engineering it. I think they know where they come from. I think they know who they are. I think they know far, far more than they're saying. And I don't expect them ever to voluntarily, I'll underline that, tell the truth. I think at some point disclosure will happen simply because this is a truth phenomenon. The cover-up is collapsing under the weight of its own lies. Whistleblowers are coming out of the woodwork. And I'm very encouraged to see that this is being discussed seriously, moving beyond the giggle factor, which is still there. And there's still skepticism and gaslighting and ridicule and all this stuff. And they're not bringing any contactees into Congress, not really.
Right.
But boy, it's bringing in a lot of interest. It's bringing in a lot of new people to this field. And I think we've reached the point now where the cover-up is collapsing under the weight of its own lies. Yeah. If our government doesn't come forward and disclose to some degree, they're going to lose control of the narrative. They become irrelevant and not credible. And that's exactly where they're at. They are not credible. Yeah. Anyone who studies this subject for any length of time will tell you that, disbelief and skepticism of government transparency, it's just not there. So we'll see how this all rolls out. But at some point, I think the truth has to come out because you can lie about it. You can ignore it. You can distort it. You can do whatever you can to bury it, but it's indestructible. Truth is truth.
Yeah.
And we have so many whistleblowers now. I think some are sanctioned. I think some are bad actors, agents. I think some are under very tight control and are basically being forced to toe the party line or else, because people have lost their lives over this subject.
Yeah.
So this is no joke. It's a real mess. This cover-up is worldwide. I'm not even precisely sure who's in control of it, but I absolutely blame the intelligence agencies and the highest level of the Navy for sure. And I think mostly them, but the Army and Air Force, of course, as well. All of them. The three-letter agencies. We have the Freedom of Information Act, which doesn't work on corporations, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, man, when you start diving into the whole apparatus, it's somewhat brilliant. And unfortunately, just the loopholes that are there to allow this to continue on as, not being outright honest about what it is to citizens of this country and really citizens.
That's true, didn't they?
Yeah. Final question. Disclosure happens at some point. What does that mean for humanity?
Good news. I don't care if it's catastrophic and we have a collapse of government. Governments don't last forever. Countries collapse constantly, and we see that over and over again. We've had a good run here in the United States, but at some point, because what happens is corruption and greed essentially cause governments to collapse because people have had enough and there's a revolution. So I think disclosure will definitely change religion. It's going to change business. It's going to change education. It's going to change science. It's going to change, everything, every aspect of our lives. And we're kind of seeing that already. According to many reports, some of the technology we have is basically reverse engineered. And we're seeing people who are, like I said, religious, have a real hard time with it. Or people, for that matter, who are atheists, also kind of, struggle with these things. People who are very materialistic or scientifically minded. It's going to cause a lot of paradigm shifting, I guess.
Yeah.
Such a shame that, the Roswell memo, remember that? They're like, we have one. And then they retracted it. If they hadn't retracted it, we would probably be much farther along. Because what I think, if we can move past wars and greed and corruption and divisiveness, we would have open official contact. And it's our own lack of spiritual progress that is preventing us from having direct open official contact. And if we can just elect truthful leaders or really move towards openness, truth, and transparency with this subject, we change the world. This is one of the reasons I think ETs are trying to wake us up to our psychic abilities, telepathy, for example. Can you imagine if we all were telepathic? We would know who's corrupt. We would know who's lying.
Yeah.
It would be a huge shift on every level of society, I think. And let's go. I'm ready.
Sign him up. Preston Dennett's going to he's going to lead the march on this. Yeah. It's, man, I'll tell you what, I cannot thank you enough for coming on. Everything that you had to say was just insightful. And it's a broad category of questions that you can ask about this because it really does impact every aspect of life when you understand that aliens and these craft and everything, they're real.
Just think what happened to medicine. Can you imagine if we had the healing technology of the ETs? Whew, that would change a lot of things.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, thank you so much. Tell the folks where they can, your research, get all your books, everything like that. Where do they find you online?
That's right. I appreciate it. I'm easy to find online. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got a website, prestondennett.weebly.com. Just punch in my name in all these social media platforms. I'm pretty easy to contact. My books are on Amazon, 32, working on the next 3 or so. So this is a serious subject. I'm not going to let it go. I'm a dog with a bone until, this comes out and is absolutely mainstream. I'm going to keep at it because this affects all of us. You might not think it does, but it does. Absolutely on every level. Economically, the energy crisis. We have free energy. What are we talking about here? It's an important subject, is my point. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Absolutely. And also, if anybody out there watching this, and there's going to be more than 50, so one of them probably has some sort of a story. Where do they contact MUFON, or what's the steps if someone has an experience and they want to get out there and talk about it, share it, get it in the record? What do they do?
Yeah, I strongly encourage people to do it. It's very therapeutic. And there's a lot of people out there who are having these same experiences. And if you don't, I understand. Most people don't. But there's all kinds of things you can do. The first thing I would recommend to anybody is just write it down, even if it's a summary. Especially don't do hypnosis unless you've written down your entire experience. There are UFO organizations. MUFON is one of them, Mutual UFO Network. They have chapters in every state. A lot of really wonderful people in MUFON. It's now without its controversies, obviously, but NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, that's one easy step. Contact various UFO researchers. There's a lot of them out there who are really itching to talk to people. I'm one of them. You can contact me. I'll give you my email, prestonufo@gmail.com. A lot of people just want someone to talk to, someone who will listen or have questions. The vast majority of people I interview, or I should say who contact me, I don't necessarily end up writing about them. They just want some help. And that's my first goal, is to really just answer questions and help people through this experience. There are support groups all over the place. Social media is a great place to hook up with people, and be careful on social media, obviously.
Yeah.
It's filled with disinformation. But it's absolutely lots of people out there who are dealing with these same sort of things. So yeah, absolutely reach out, and I think you'll be surprised. I always encourage people, especially if you're skeptic, ask your family, your friends, your coworkers. You're going to get a shock. I bet you that someone who has had an experience like this, that they don't talk about it, because why would they?
Yeah.
No one wants to be gaslit or ridiculed.
Yep, and that's part of the problem. Well, listen, if I ever, and I've never had anything of the sort, but if I ever do go through an abduction, I will contact Preston Dennett for sure. All right?
I'd appreciate it, yeah.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. The one and only Preston Dennett. Thank you. Whether you agree, disagree, or are still undecided, conversations like this matter. Not because they give easy answers, but because they force better questions. If you want to support long-form conversations like this and help keep the Ryan Files fully independent, check out these links. Subscribe and watch on YouTube and become a channel member for early access to upcoming episodes. And for extended conversations, behind-the-scenes content, and bonus episodes, you can join us at Patreon at patreon.com/The Ryan Files. You can also listen to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Just search for The Ryan Files. And never forget TheRyanFiles.com, your headquarters for links, episodes, the Deep Dive Book Club, and the Ryan Files merchandise. You folks are awesome. Be amazing, be positive, and stay curious out there, my friends. And I'll see you next time right here on The Ryan Files.
Are you not curious?
Preparing to transfer the Ryan Files. Now.
I present to you, with great intrigue and wonder, the Ryan Files.